In this week's episode of the Breakout Growth Podcast, Ethan, Garr, and I chat with Kevin Yip, the co-founder and chief operating officer of Blueboard. So Blueboard is a platform that lets companies reward and recognize their employees' contributions with unique and, frankly, awesome experiences. So new and innovative concepts like this suggest a blue ocean of opportunity, but sometimes when something is so innovative, dialing in product market fit can actually be a real challenge. So Ethan, what stood out to you as we dug in with Kevin?
I think it was just that, Sean. You and I can look at a company sending a standout employee to a Michelin-rated restaurant or maybe sending them on a skydiving adventure and think, wow, that's totally awesome. But it was really interesting to hear the process of Kevin and his team getting from 0 to 1 with an offering that was really a totally new concept. They're not selling analytics software to companies that know they need better visibility into their data. They're selling employee happiness, probably to companies that already value and recognize their employees in one way or another.
Yeah. And you and I both know how challenging it can be to sell into HR departments because it's something we did at the beginning of the pandemic. And we quickly learned that challenge, and we were still trying to dial in product market fit. And that's exactly where Kevin and his team found themselves, really trying to focus on finding ways to educate companies. But I think Kevin understood that finding product market fit was job one, and he wasn't afraid of the hard work and diligence it would take to get there.
Yeah, I would say him literally going door to door to 300 companies, I think he said, in Blueboard's early days was really proof of that diligence. But I think what our listeners are going to find valuable is just how that focus on product market fit and really ensuring that the company continued to validate it, even as COVID and other challenges have come up over the years. It shows just what it takes to always put customer value at the forefront.
Yeah, for sure. And by the way, like many of the companies we have on the podcast, Blueboard is growing really fast.
Yeah.
So if you are looking for a new opportunity with a company, they definitely know how to recognize and reward employee contributions. So they may be exactly the place you're looking for. And who knows, you may find yourself climbing Everest or some other great experience.
Yeah, that's very funny. And before we jump in, we wanted to let our listeners know that we've added a new format to this podcast. Every other week between full episodes like this one, Sean and I are going to air quick 7 to 8 minute episodes that we call growth snacks. These are quick hit conversations where we focus on sharing one learning to help you and your team grow. And our first one is already up, and you can also find it on our new YouTube channel, which is linked from the homepage of breakoutgrowth.net.
Yeah, definitely check out the growth snack episodes. To be honest, this last one we did was 8.5 minutes. So we're shooting for that 7 to 8 minutes, but they're really loaded with one actionable piece of advice. And this last one will help you drive higher impact experiments, which is something we're all trying to do. Mm-hmm. So we're excited for them. And we're also looking for cool ways to involve you as the listeners in the participation of actually selecting a topic. So keep your eyes open and ears open for something like that. But for now, Ethan, let's get to it.
All right, let's do it.
Hey, Kevin, welcome to the Breakout Growth Podcast.
What's up, Sean? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're super excited. I'm also joined by my co-host, Ethan. Hey, Ethan.
Hey, Sean. Hey, Kevin.
Yeah, so Kevin and I, Ethan, I was just telling you, we met a few months ago sitting on the UC Berkeley campus, and I got really excited about his business. It sounds like you guys are doing some awesome things and on a really good growth trajectory. But I'm guessing that there's at least one or two members of the audience that have not yet experienced Blueboard. So maybe a good place to start is just give a quick introduction to what the business is all about.
Yeah, so Blueboard is all about helping companies reward and recognize their employees. And where we kind of really focus is delivering experiences for great work. And so experiences can be skydiving for the first time, learning to make Italian gnocchi, surfing in Hawaii, or just like a Michelin star meal. Anything that anyone would want to do outside of work, we want to help deliver on behalf of great work. And so that's yeah.
Yeah, where did you guys decide to how did you come up with the concept in the first place?
So, yeah, no, it's a great question. So I was a auditor at PricewaterhouseCoopers coming out of college. Very fun, sexy job.
That sounds awesome.
That was great. I had a buddy who was a roommate at the time who was consulting at Accenture. And for me personally, I was put on a project, and in the beginning of it, had a couple team members quit. They were like, out of here, don't want to do the work. And so me being the dumb one, not quitting, I had to take on all both of their work, right? So three people's work for one project. And so I ended up working about 100-hour weeks for over 2.5 months, right? 7 days a
Yeah.
week, 12 to 15-hour days, complete grind. But I got it done, right? It didn't look pretty. At the end of it, I was like anxious, stressed. I was about 25 pounds heavier. My girlfriend at the time, who's now an ex-girlfriend, was on the verge of breaking up with me, right? I
Yeah.
was just a miserable human being.
Right.
And I remember my manager coming up to me and was like, Kevin, like, amazing job. Like, we really see how much energy you put into this, how much you've sacrificed. And she put down an Amex gift card on my table, on my desk, and was like, the partner and I really appreciate you. And then like walked away. It was almost like the straw that broke the camel's back.
Mm-hmm.
But rather than feeling like appreciated, valued, like, oh wow, like I'm stoked, I'm going to do it again, our next project, I was like, I'm a cog in the machine. I'm
Yeah.
just a number. This is bullshit. And I came back and I was like venting to my roommate, and we started talking about, hey, like, what would have been a better option, right? And so like we kind of started thinking like, well, wow, like actually there's a lot going on in the background to deliver that gift card. There's millions of dollars in budget. She had to go to like our partner in HR to get approval. She had to pick up the gift card, right? All of these great like intentions, and then like just to
Right.
hand it to me and me reacting that way was,
Yeah. They're,
it felt flat.
wah,
Exactly, right? And so how Blueboard came about was like, we're like, oh, imagine if instead she came up to me and was like, hey, Kevin, I know you've been really frustrated with your health. I know you love boxing. I actually got you a boxing membership to the gym around the corner for the next 3 months. Or I know you and your girlfriend, you've been eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner here in the office, for the last, every day.
yeah.
Take her out to a nice dinner date, maybe a cheese and wine pairing class. Same cost as a gift card, but imagine how much more personal and thoughtful that would have felt for me as this like high performing employee.
Right.
And that was like like I think we have like something here, just like from in the idea stage, right? Like
Yeah.
companies are spending, and it's crazy. It's like companies in the US spend over $70 billion on non-cash employee rewards. A
Uh-huh.
majority of it goes to swag, a Dyson vacuum, a blender, and gift cards, right?
Okay.
If we
Yeah.
could help
Yeah.
deliver something more meaningful, like, oh, what would that feel? Would that feel better to the employee? And we
Right.
just thought like, absolutely. So, anyways,
And
yeah,
did you end up like, well, someone has to have thought of this already, and then go and start kind of trying to find someone who's doing it, and surprised to not
totally.
see it?
Yeah. And so what we found was that like recognition and rewards in general, like was a very like software oriented solution. Hey,
Mm,
let's track spend, let's make it easy to give out rewards. But like they didn't really care about the rewards themselves.
got it.
And
Yeah.
so like interestingly in our experience, right, we were like, oh, the reward really matters. Like actually like all of these software and budgeting, like that's required, but it like didn't deliver on what like a reward and recognition should feel like to the end
Mm-hmm.
user.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, so we started going through it, realized like no one's delivering experiences. And I think what in our like customer interviews or like research, what we found was like the top 2 to 3% of managers were doing something like Blueboard is today. They're
Mm,
thinking about who the person is. They're being
mm-hmm.
thoughtful. They might be spending even their own money. And be like,
Right.
hey, I got you a whiskey tasting class. Or like, hey, like, I got you this, gift card to Gary Danko's, take your partner there. And we're like, there's some of this behavior already happening in top managers. Um,
Right. So how
anyways,
can we make it easier for them?
how can we make it easier and scale it across an org?
Right.
It's funny because Sean and I both we've been reading Empowered by Marty Kagan, and there was a moment in it that stood out to me where he was talking about rewards, and where he said, sometimes there have been times where I took money out of my own pocket to make those rewards. And it's interesting you're saying the top 2 to 3%. I think the best managers in the world, they are really thinking, they are really taking that empathetic approach, and they're really thinking, like you said, it's not just about like, how do I tell Kevin, hey, thanks for doing something. It's, I realize who you are as a human being, and I want to reward that. So it's interesting, how that could become the spark for this incredible business. I'm curious, back at the time, what did you identify as the biggest risks in starting that business?
With anything, with any like kind of new venture, we and I hadn't started a company before, right? So it's all of the, well, how do we build a product, right? How do we get an MVP up and running in front of our customers, and then like how do we ultimately convince them to buy? Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's obviously like tons of risk in there, but actually, like for me, it was like personal risk, right? Because in the
Sure.
early stage, right, like you're quitting your job, you have like a cush, like you know salary, you're in your mid 20s, you don't necessarily want to be broke in your mid 20s and
Right.
single, right? And so like it was
Or
all the
just ego
opportunity,
too. Like, yeah, is everyone going to think I'm an
totally.
idiot?
And yeah, and I went through a lot of that, right? That was
Yeah.
honestly like a lot of the risk and that I had to like kind of deal with personally. Um, but I take, at the end of the day, like I think, the risk can be mitigated with just like thorough research and like really like, okay, like curiosity. Like,
Sure.
hey, getting in front of your customers, like really, are you solving a problem, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so like obviously as you start to build conviction into what you're doing, like it becomes less of a risk because you have more confidence, right? It's more data points that are validated.
Yeah.
It's kind of how I see it.
But sometimes people are just like, they don't want to deal with anything that could bring negativity to it, and so they're
Mm,
just like so laser focused on, oh, this will have to be successful, it'll definitely be successful, and like, maybe ignore some of those data points. So were you able to kind of remove the passion a little bit, dispassionately kind of explore the opportunity?
yeah. And maybe unpack that a little bit. Sorry.
Yeah.
Like,
So like one of the things that I like to do is, I mean, you may have heard this before, like the pre-mortem. Have you
mm,
heard that concept of just
yeah.
like, essentially, if this fails, what is the number one reason that it's going to fail? And
Uh,
and then kind of like, so starting at the most negative and trying to like kind of validate those assumptions and work your way up to okay, there's enough stuff here, let's do it. But what I was saying is that I think a lot of founders, they don't want to hear the critics. It's so easy to be a critic, and they get kind of defensive about it. And obviously, I can ask these questions because you've gotten to a point where it's really validated, it's growing quickly, but in
mm,
those early days, like, I mean, some people just get lucky, and like, ultimately the everything plays out the way that they hoped. But I was just curious, yeah, if you like how you could go, particularly with, like, let's say you're pitching to investors the idea. You got to be like, oh yeah, this is going to work, this is why it's going to work. And then you have to switch into that critical mindset where, okay, does this problem really exist, and kind of dispassionately explore each of the factors that are going to need to be validated in order for it to work.
yeah. And honestly, when I think about like kind of these conversations, I think of customer conversations and I think of
Yeah.
investor conversations.
Mm.
And the investor ones have been by far, 10x harder.
Yeah.
And if you think about the business we're in, right, it's it's really about saying thank you to your employees in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Stanford MBA is going to tear that shit to, in two,
Right.
right? They're like, oh, why do you need to say thank you? Like, boom, more compensation. Oh, benefit. It's just
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
people just don't get it. And there's a really logical argument to that, right? They're
Right.
going to be like, oh, well, the CFO doesn't think these are in the top three priorities. And I'm like, the CFO is right. It's not in the top three priorities. And yet businesses still spend on it. And they spend 1% to 2% of payroll.
Hmm.
So like, I think like what I've come to understand over time, and it it hasn't been easy, is that like there are like with any business there are going to be like really there's going to be like critical feedback
Hmm.
that will, like, if you really perseverate on, will almost tell you to not do the business,
Right.
right? Or hey, you're not solving a big enough important problem,
Yeah.
And I think it's the balance of like, for me, it's like the customer conversations are always like, oh, wow, that would be really interesting. Like, I have a couple people that I would love to do this for, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so like what I would always go back to is like, who are we ultimately serving? We're serving the customer.
Yeah.
And there's that kind of curiosity and that like natural interest that like we like kind of flex to know that, hey, this is actually something that they are interested in and that they're buying, that they're seeing success and that they're paying more for it year over
Yeah.
year. That like that has been able to like investor, like, you have a good point,
Hmm.
but this is what our customers say. This is what
Yeah.
the
And what
data
I also
shows.
like is like what
Yeah.
really triggered you to even want to pursue the opportunity was your conviction around the problem.
Hmm.
And the solution you want to be flexible on, but if you really understand the problem and you feel like that problem, I mean, you saw it, you worked super hard, and then they cheapened it by just putting like a cash value on all the sacrifices you made, and no sort of meaning in that, and just saying, at least on a sample size of one, I felt that problem. How many other people feel that problem? And if there enough people feel the problem, there's an opportunity there.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
I'm curious. Did you ever, since you've started this business, have you ever had an interaction with the PricewaterhouseCooper person who gave you that gift card? I'm just,
Yeah,
yeah. Did
definitely.
can you tell us about what that conversation? Because it just seems like it'd be fascinating to go back, and I'm wondering, like, if she even,
Yeah, did she have an "oh, of course" moment, or was she like, "What the hell are you talking about"?
or was she like, "Can I work for you?"
No, yeah, no. And the funny thing is like we were really close, right? We're sitting right next to each other, right? And we're both working all that time. And so if I think about like a person who could have had the opportunity to like recognize me in a personal way, it would have been her.
Hmm.
And yet it
Right.
still fell flat. And so that's where I kind of and we joked around about it. Um, but
In the end, it turned out to be the best thing she could ever have done for you, right? Because
right, no, exactly, exactly. And part of like when you and in conversations with her, like kind of after starting this, a lot of managers, right, like recognition is somewhat of an afterthought, right? The
Right.
top 2 to 3%, like I said, right, like really take the time. But after that, it's like almost like a checklist item for
Right.
even the better 50%, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like the fact that you're just doing it is like enough for them, right? But it still doesn't have the intended impact. And so, to me, it just seemed like something that like, okay, if we can build a system and a process and make it super easy to give something personal and meaningful,
Hmm.
we were like, companies are going to spend money on this.
Uh-huh.
It almost like it's like, why wouldn't they?
so
Anyways.
I'm curious though. Um, Obviously, you said I think $70 billion are spent on
Hmm.
things like this. But were you trying to tap into like a clear existing budget? Like it sounded like that gift card that you got probably was sort of like it didn't come out of any specific budget. So she had to say like, "Hey, he's been working his butt off. We should recognize him," and figured out a way to get you that money or
It's almost
that
like a
card.
spot bonus budget or
Yeah.
something.
So it seems like now you're going and you have a pitch. You're saying, "Hey, we have this valuable thing that will make help you with retention, will improve your business." Did you have to educate your potential customer on how to find money to do this because they did it more ad hoc, or did it exist already?
So the recognition as a kind of business has like existed for years, but
Okay.
like, we are constantly educating companies,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And you think about a maturity curve for, even a company today that's like progressive, all about people and culture and like needs to be because, like a software company needs to keep their engineers happy.
Right.
They're still like, at a certain point, they're like, oh, like we're just, charging this on like our Amex card. And like, the CFO is like, what the hell is going on over here? Right. Like,
Right.
so like there is like a maturity curve and like education need to be done with like almost every company. Um,
But I could actually see myself actually being receptive to it. I like in my last CEO role, I would say that the part I hated the most was the people part. And it's kind of, I'm a pretty good people person, but people are complicated, like
no
that,
easy answers.
yeah,
No
I
easy
have,
answers.
I've got these puzzles of trying to figure out the business and trying to get all these things. And the puzzles feel more solvable than the people. And, to the point, just to like iterate how scarred I am from that. After I sold my last business, I was like, one rule in life. The previous rule I had was I'm never going to work for anyone else again. The rule afterwards was I'm never going to have anyone work for me again. So it was just kind of like, yeah, I just, the people side is complicated. And so that's why I'm saying I would be receptive if someone said, you need a system for meaningful recognition, and here's how that connects with your broader goals in the business, whether it's retention, motivation, all these things that are really important to the success of the business. So I think the
Hmm.
education's there, and even somewhat sounds like the budgets are there, but but it doesn't seem like a huge leap for a lot of people to be able to see what you saw.
Yeah. Ethan, you brought up a good point that actually we're currently undergoing right now. And so like really, the first several years was about building a platform and making it really easy to send an experience,
Hmm.
deliver an experience to an employee, right? And what we're seeing is like our go-to-market is currently evolving from like this like platform to like product marketing. And so like, okay, we have this experience delivery platform is what we call it, makes it easy to send an experience. How are we productizing vertically on top of that to attack certain budgets? So we've built a product for anniversary and service rewards when people hit their 5-year anniversary, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've built a President's Club product to deliver these like say like kind of these annual sales incentives to top sellers. And so like we're kind of going through this like getting close to our customers. How are they using us in interesting ways? What outcomes are they getting? And then like working closely with them to kind of productize that and then like market that out. And that's like something that we're currently going through right now.
Like what drove that? What drove that change in the business? How did you figure out that that was the logical next step to keep driving growth?
We always, and it was something we just in how we built it early on was like, hey, like, let's just make it easy. And like, you can do this for your customers and like pipeline and your employees, and like let's just sell in and like figure out, let's get close to the customers and figure out how they're using us, and then work to kind of build support around that. Because we weren't HR professional. I worked for 18 months. I've had a job for 18 months, in my career, right? And so I'm
Mm,
like, I'm not going to act like I'm an expert in like how the world of work,
sure.
happens and how organizations run. So I think it was a little bit of just like, honestly, the awareness of like knowing we were like somewhat amateurs at this, to like not just like make it functional and then like learn from our customers early on.
And so were you
Um,
trying to get customers like from day one, or were you kind of going through that like let's get the solution just right before we
mm,
before we try to scale the customer side?
we've always been very like kind of growth oriented as a company, and I
Okay.
think part of the reason is just both myself, my co-founder, we're not engineers. That's a whole another story of how to get your first engineer, but like we're more like we're more like business and sales folks.
Okay.
And so even when we had this idea of like, okay, how could it work? We had no product, and this is kind of going back. I had moved back to my parents' place. I had gone completely broke. I was one of the first
Yeah.
Lyft drivers, so it's like I had to sacrifice all that stuff, right? That we kind of alluded to earlier. But when we came up with like an actual product idea, we sponsored a HR innovators meetup.
Oh, smart.
We had no product, and we showed up with our parents' laptops. We put on, well, or their iPads. We put on some like just pictures of experiences,
Mm-hmm.
and we said, hey, like you can like give this to an employee, like, oh, I have a surfing lesson, or like, oh, go skydiving, or like, and we just like wanted to get feedback from HR buyers.
Uh-huh.
And like that actually was like, oh, this is really cool. Like there was enough like positive feedback. We're
Mm-hmm.
like, all right, let's build this.
Okay.
Okay,
So
yeah,
even at that point, you hadn't quite told yourself we're going to do this for sure. It was more in that kind of exploratory stage, and that
hmm,
you got enough feedback there where you're like, let's go for it.
yeah, yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And then at what point, like, so, and then, but you aggressively were trying to grow it, or aggressively trying to sell it even while you were figuring out how to deliver it.
Yeah.
That's good. I
Yeah.
didn't know, like,
Yeah. No, no. So like I mean I
that's
think there
real
was
world
like
stuff there. You know?
yeah, no. So like early on, right? This is early customer acquisition. We were
Yeah.
going to, Bay Area skydiving and, Booth B Academy of the Beverage Arts to like be experience providers on our platform, selling them.
Uh-huh.
At the same time, like Crunchbase data used to be free. We like basically exported all the data of companies that had raised over $10 million,
Okay.
threw it on a Google Maps API, and we went door to door.
Oh my
So
God.
we
That's
went to
awesome.
like, that's how we got our first customer. We went
Yeah.
door to door to over 300 customers. Um,
Just
I got
grinding.
kicked out of Dropbox early on. Being the amateur I was, I didn't know like kind of the EAs could look at someone's calendar. So I was like, oh yeah, we have a meeting with like Kevin who runs the sales team, and he's like, yeah, what time? He's like, oh, 2:30. And I'm like, yeah, you're not on a calendar. I'm like,
Wait a second,
gotcha, yeah.
Sean. You
Yeah.
worked at Dropbox a
No,
while
that's not
back.
about
Was that you?
Yeah. I got in before they had calendars, so I could BS my way into. Well, that's great. And then so it was there sort of a marked turning point there, or was it just literally like every day getting a little bit better at how to sell this thing, and every day figuring out how to deliver it, and it just kept getting better and better?
The first 2 years were like, every customer we won, like we freaking scratched and clawed to win, right? Like there was
Yeah.
like it was like one customer like a month maybe, right?
Uh-huh.
But it's like I think at an early stage, and we didn't take on any funding early on. It was just myself, my co-founder. Like that's kind of
I think I
like
think with those kinds of results, funding probably would have been pretty tough.
exactly right.
Yeah.
Um, you know, yeah, and so like I think like the first turning point was, you know, I think our first deal was like $5,000, right? And I was like, oh
Uh-huh.
my, spending so much, right? And we had I had a buddy that I went to school with that was in HR at GoPro, um, and we got in front of them, and honestly, a perfect customer for Blueboard, right?
Yeah.
Perfect prospect. And at the time, there were about 1,000 employees, and it was like, oh wow, this is like an enterprise product. And so
Yeah.
we went through a sales process with them, like, hey, like we're gonna roll this out to our entire company. And we were very clear, like, all right, it's just, there's three of us. We had an engineer at that time too.
Yeah.
And like that was our first big like, ooh,
Now
like,
what?
well, yeah, now what? Like, oh shit. But then also like, hey, like the product is so simple, right? It's like, you
Yeah.
could probably, program it on like these no code easily these days, right? But like it was like let's get really close to them. Let's build a product, an enterprise product for them. Let's learn about how the budgeting works, about
Yeah.
who uses it, and then we can like sell more of a product and program to
Uh-huh.
larger companies.
And
And so like
what's
that,
the business model? Is or has it changed? But is it like taking a cut of the experiences? Is it SaaS? Like how do you guys charge for
yeah,
it?
yeah. So we're like a SaaS marketplace, right? And
Okay.
so we kind of create and kind of build up our experience marketplace on one side, right? We kind
Hmm.
of, get a take rate from that spend. And then we charge like kind of a software like fee, um, SaaS fee,
Okay. So
for
it's got two
the
different revenue
access.
sources then.
Two different revenue sources, exactly.
So,
Cool. And that's like almost a network effect too, in the fact that with no customers, the experience side is pretty hard to build, and with no experiences, the customer side is pretty hard to build.
Yeah, exactly.
so
Yeah.
I was just curious. You mentioned at the beginning, like simple. The product was barely a product at the time, and at what point did it become really or has it even become really it seems like it's much less about the technology and more about making those connections. There must have been a point though where it became a technology marketplace. Was there sort of a defined moment where you're like, we've got to invest in that?
Yeah. And so it was shortly after like we kind of acquired GoPro as a customer. And so, they were using us in the US and they said, hey, we have a few different offices in the Philippines, I think in London, and we want to use you there too. Right. And so now like, a simple like kind of content management system that's like kind of managing these offerings, like they need to be like geo-smart. We need to route like the employees like to the right kind of geographic menus.
You need experiences in those markets.
We need experience in those marketplaces, right? We need, and like there needs to be like a workflow to help deliver those experiences. And so like that's when like we were like, all right, we need to invest heavily kind of on the R&D to build out the product. And it just continues, right? Like,
yeah.
We, last year we did experiences in, over 50 countries.
Wow.
Right. Obviously languages, currencies, payments, et cetera. Right.
But you've hired a fourth person now, so you can handle it. No,
we got 3.5.
What's the wildest experience you've delivered? Most unique thing that you've delivered?
Ooh. We have this James Bond experience, and that like it has a really great story to it. But what you do is a great story in the formation of this business. But what the experience is like you and a friend, you get a tux or a gown, that you rent out. You get picked up in a black car, skydiving, right? Land, you have an Aston Martin or Jaguar waiting for you on the runway. Zip that around. The sequence here is important. You drop off the car, and then you have a private mixology class where you learn to make the perfect martini. So that's like so that's the James Bond experience.
Wow. So I had my own James Bond experience years ago. I was in London, and I get in the elevator, and Roger Moore gets in the elevator with me, and I'm accidentally hit up instead of down. So we're like going to the like top floor suite, and so he starts like striking up a conversation with me because I don't know who the hell he is, but I'm going to the top, so he thinks I'm important. Clearly I wasn't, but I still didn't know who he was, and I get off the elevator, and he comes back down a few minutes later, and I was with my CEO of the company at the time, and he's like, "That's Roger Moore over there." I'm like, that's a dude from the elevator. Who's Roger Moore? And so
what worries me is that some people listening to this won't know that Roger Moore was James Bond several decades ago.
They can connect the dots. But, yeah. I started thinking the James Bond experience was going to be what mine was, but that's different. But that's awesome, though. And then I think if you look back at the business and all the different stages and challenges you've gone through, is there one challenge that stands out as like, oh man, that was a really hard thing to overcome?
There's definitely a few. I think one is definitely COVID, right?
Right.
Pre-COVID, pre-COVID, our core buyer is HR, makes up nearly probably 100% of our business. And we do only in real life experiences. Right? You think about COVID kind of moving everyone from the office to home. HR is just slammed. It's probably like, they're probably the most overworked team.
Yeah, they're not active at that moment.
Yeah, right. And then we're also selling, hey, send your employees out to travel, to go to a cooking class. You're like, oh wow, like this is like very tone deaf. And so like it just happened to coincide at the time that we were about to fundraise. I think we took our first meeting like end of February 2020. We're like, oh, this is gonna be a great process. Yeah, funny.
Yeah. Interestingly, Ethan and I were working on a project at that time, trying to contact HR departments. So we know exactly the challenge of that. It was really tough.
Yeah, and so like just like off a cliff, right? Anything from our lead funnel to like just like people answer, our customers answering our emails.
Yeah.
And so it felt like one of those moments where like, oh wow, like this actually could, destroy the business. Like we could be a goner. And so
Right.
we first launched virtual experiences. And we rolled out menus so our customers could continue like to send out experiences and people can use them. Um, we launched virtual experiences and in-home experiences, we call it, in 4 weeks, and we continue to add to that. And so that was like a major win that we didn't know if it would land or not. That was a huge win for us. And then the second thing we did was we rolled out a sales product, and we said, hey, who's trying to work right now? We're like, we are the growth team. We're trying to sell.
Yeah.
And so are a lot of other people. And so like kind of rolling out like a mix of rolling out these virtual and in-home experiences as incentives to sales teams.
Yeah.
Took, a few cycles of like learning how to position it and sell and market it. But then after that, it just took off. And so now we have two core buyers, right? HR and sales, and they're both doing it, extremely well.
So it turned out that challenge was almost more of an accelerant once you figured it out. Once the HR came back online, then you had really two drivers of growth in the business.
Yeah, exactly. And so that was like, yeah, kind of a big challenge that like, ended up being a huge opportunity once we kind of figure out how to get around it.
That's awesome.
From the perspective of selling into HR teams, which is then more general towards the entire employee population versus selling into a sales team, does it change the perspective on like what the value is that you're offering, or is that consistent and it's just about repositioning the language around that?
It's there's a lot of repositioning, because HR, you're talking culture, engagement, right? You're talking about like a lot of like it's an emotional sale, right? Emotional sales, like just for at least for us, you got to be real direct, when you're selling to sales teams. And so they like, hey, I get the emotion, cool. Like, what are we going to do? Like, how are we going to roll this out? And so it's like very much about the how. The value is still the same, right? We're delivering an experience to some employee who's worked their ass off. But the packaging, positioning, how we sell it, much different.
Sorry, Sean, do you mind if I just ask one follow-up to that? Is so you mentioned earlier when you went, selling, talking to customers, easy. Talking to investors was really hard because, very nuts and bolts, and like, why not just pay them more money, right? Like, why not just give them more compensation? Salespeople traditionally, and not all salespeople, I don't want to overgeneralize, but it's easy for them to say, hey, rather than give me, this experience, raise my commission, right? Or like, it's very easy to be just.
Yeah, I mean, there's the cliche of coin-operated salespeople.
So I'm
totally.
I'm just curious. Did you encounter that? Has it been a hurdle, or has that not really been the issue?
It's definitely a hurdle because I think there's like, the coin-operated rep is a long-standing kind of notion with account executives. I think what people see, especially for high-performing folks, if you go to a Salesforce or a Workday, you take the top 10% of their account executives, they're making $500,000 a year, right? What's giving them another $5,000? And so like that's kind of where we position is like you're going to have to spend a larger amount of money to actually have the same kind of emotional and like motivational impact.
Yeah,
right.
But if I say like, hey, if I take that 5,000, I'm like, oh, you're going to do a, two, courtside tickets to watch Steph Curry, beat out Ray Allen on the, the number of 3 points all time, right? Like, yeah, let's do that, right? And that's probably like 3,500, So it's like I think what we've done well is like reposition. Like you're gonna have to spend more money on the cash, right? or you can do an experience and have like a bigger impact with less.
Yeah.
And actually, in my experience, kind of top salespeople that I've worked with tend to be sort of experienced junkies anyway. Like they're outgoing. They got more to talk about the experience that they did, and so I can actually see that being super appealing.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Yeah, and I also think there's something about I would imagine the culture, the culture building experience of people coming back to the office and saying, "I just did this." And I mean, I know when I was part of Teltech, a couple years into it, we had a bunch of people going to a conference, and we're like, "Why don't we just take the whole company and we'll just all go out to Colorado?" And we ended up having this incredible hiking and camping trip with like whatever the company was at the time, 30, 40 people. The next year that turned into a company cruise. And occasionally I heard these, a rumbling or two from someone who was like, I wish they would just give me more money than take us on a cruise. But I don't think anyone who went on the cruise came back from that and would have traded that for even more dollars than, let's say it cost $1,000 per employee or whatever. I don't think they would have traded that for $3,000 in cash. I think it was just, there was something magical about those experiences. Do you find that a lot of the experiences end up being group experiences, or are they really all more individualized with what you're offering?
We focus more on individual experiences, and we've just found that to be the better like business model and product for us. I think there's definitely an adjacency of group experiences that I think we'll eventually get to.
And is that the same budget though? Is there kind of competition for that same budget?
It's not the same budget actually.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah, so we actually it's a completely separate budget.
Interesting.
And so that 70 billion on non-cash is individual rewards mostly.
So you mentioned SaaS, and obviously like a big SaaS metric is usually customer retention. How many maybe even customer expansion when talking B2B SaaS. What needs to go right in an account to retain and ideally even expand?
So now, and Ethan, your comment was a good lead into this. Our biggest thing that leads to net revenue retention, that's what the metric we focus on, is in terms of like kind of the tactics within like our programs. Is there a feedback loop for employees to share their experiences to the rest of the company, right? Because that if we start with an engineering group and then all of a sudden the engineering group's talking about it, they're posting experiences on Slack, it's going out in company newsletters, the sales team sees it, then the legal team sees it, and they're like, like we should be doing that too. And that's honestly,
why haven't I gotten something like that? It can even be like kind of pull demand.
Exactly. Right. And so like, that's actually the huge thing that like we really focus on is like, we need, and we don't have it, but like our goal is to have every single experience like completed, gone on, shared, shared in whatever kind of feedback loop that it's set up at the company. And we even have like, for certain things like companies, like we'll actually send out, we have a videographer who used to work at GoPro, and we'll go tell the story of what the person did, to get the Blueboard experience. We'll tape it, and then they'll share it on their company LinkedIn. So it's a good employer branding asset. And also
they're like watermarked on there on the video as well.
Yeah, no. Yeah. So it's like, that sharing component is huge for us in terms of like organic net revenue retention and expansion. Yeah.
So do you have obviously you just said your retention is really that key metric. Do you quantify that into like a North Star metric that everyone is aligned around?
ARR. Yeah. So we're going, we have, our new business team, new ARR, and then our account management team on, kind of retaining like our existing and like kind of net expansions.
But there's not something that's kind of a little less just dollar oriented, but like monthly experiences delivered, or something that maybe that the team could feel a little more emotion toward.
I think for us, because like for instance, right, like we have this, channel called Blueboarding where it shows all of the experiences that are being posted through
Mm-hmm.
our platform.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is something we talk about that's very front and center. We have a
Okay.
pretty like kind of culture first company that I think like for us we don't really need to focus on like that emotional metric as much
Okay.
because like it's so ingrained into kind of our product.
Yeah.
Um,
That it's
anyways,
not a void if
there's not a
there's
void exactly.
yeah
Yeah.
if it's an up and to the right metric, that it doesn't need to be something that's a touchy feely metric.
Eh,
It's just really funny because it's kind of like your whole business is
Yeah.
not about the coin, and then you're optimizing on the coin.
it's fun.
But that being said, and I don't want to get myself in trouble. That being said, like we do have this other thing called, and this is like on the other side, but we don't count this metric
Yeah.
and track it. But we get love letters. We call it love letters,
Uh-huh.
where it's like an employee like just like thanking us or
That's
thanking their company
Yeah.
for
That's
like this
awesome.
amazing experience. So
Yeah.
like we have somebody probably like every month proposing to their life partner with on a Blueboard experience.
Oh wow.
Right. We
That's
have
cool.
like people, we sent a person, this is probably like one of my favorite ones. We sent a person to see the Northern Lights and they named their kind of their newborn Aurora after kind of the Northern Lights on that trip. So it's
or
like,
Northwest or something. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny how you're saying how there's just sort of this natural alignment because you deliver experience. Sean and we were struggling because I had this question in mind and I couldn't really articulate it that well. But we actually we interviewed the CEO Joseph Cohen of Universe probably 7-8 months ago, maybe even longer. Universe is a website creation tool. It's an app where you can create a website in like 2 minutes. And he's talked extensively about the fact that one of the reasons he thinks he's so successful is that the company is so aligned, like their goals are so aligned with their customer goals. Like if they're helping people, individual creators create websites, and if they're successful with those websites, then that value is this. It's totally aligned with the value that they're trying to create by creating this easy to make web experience on a mobile app. And it's interesting that because it sounds similar that because you're so focused on delivering unique experiences and valuable experiences, that sort of connects up through your organization. I think is kind of what you're saying, and that makes it easier culturally to get everyone aligned towards that.
we have a very mission driven company. We have, like, because experience, like we see ourselves as an experience company and our product is, in recognition and building software and like that. But because we see ourselves as an experience company, it attracts like, people that are very like-minded, right?
Sure.
Like people
Mhm.
that like want to like kind of push themselves like outside their comfort zone, that like have these like really rich passions, and it like that kind of like natural like attraction of for our employees, like it just like it creates like a really like self-sustaining culture.
Uh-huh.
Do you
That
You
probably is very similar to what you alluded to at Universe.
do you?
Yeah, so you
Sorry, go ahead, Sean.
yeah, we're just real quick on this one. You talked about in the early days being super just like grinded out, sales driven, and how you kickstarted the business. Is it still really sales driven, or are you guys able to generate pretty good warm leads through something, and then salespeople are pushing them over the finish line, or like what's the kind of acquisition model that you're able to get someone from consideration to buying this?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. What we've found like with HR, it's very community focused, early on. And
Mm-hmm.
that like kind of that cold outbound, cold like
Mm.
smiling and dialing, that does not work for HR.
Okay,
And
interesting.
so we really focused on and like kind of also like aligned with like introducing a new type of way to reward somebody,
Mm-hmm.
that like becoming a thought leader, having a point of view on like the future of work, having a point of view on like what does it mean to like invest in your culture, invest in your people, was
Mm-hmm.
something that like we think one that's like important to have an opinion on, and like our customers would really care about that. And so that was
Mm-hmm.
something early on, on the content marketing side and like where
Mm-hmm.
we really want to formulate a perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went in on the community and thought leadership early on.
Mm-hmm.
And so right now, something like of our HR buyers, over 90% of those are like kind of marketing generated, right?
Okay, cool. Yeah.
So we do very little outbound on that side. Now, obviously, when we spun up our sales product during COVID, we didn't have that brand. It was all outbound.
They're much more into sales. The problem is that they keep stealing your salespeople. Probably, man, you're good. Come work for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that could be a little rougher, but yeah. So that makes a ton of sense. And have you seen like you said it's like pretty community driven on the HR side? Have you seen a pretty good kind of word of mouth referral between different HR leaders across companies?
Yes. We have actually these like kind of Blueboard, what we call Blueboard advocates, where they'll like leave a job and they'll take Blueboard to their next company. And so like I think the top Blueboard advocate has taken us to probably 4 different companies.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it definitely does. The word does spread.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully it's not because they keep getting fired, but bad attitude actually turns out to be the best customer profile. But that's not quite it. Anything else you want to try to uncover, Ethan? This has been awesome. I feel like I've got a really solid understanding of how you guys got to where you are.
No, the amazing thing is not 20 minutes before we started this conversation, a friend of mine from college called me up and she started a new job. I'm not going to say the company because I'm going to make an introduction for you, Kevin, but at a very, very big software company, her role is Senior Director, Associate Engagement and Wellbeing. So
that's perfect.
This is exactly, this is a role specifically about delivering these experiences for employees. So I think it's interesting. I think the world is becoming much more conscious of employee well-being and delivering real value for the employees and rewards. So it's just interesting. Like, I don't know. It just seems like my ears must have been ringing, as they say, when she called. But no, this has been really cool. And, one thing I wanted to,
I actually have one more question before we get to that last question.
Okay, go ahead.
How, I'm a part of a YPO organization, a young presidents organization, where I interact with a lot of CEOs, and I've seen a theme emerge in the last 4 or 5 months is that so many companies went remote, went virtual, and as they try to move back to the office, they're getting feedback from their employees that they don't want to go back to the office. And they at least want the flexibility to have a lot of remote work time. And one of the big fears is sort of culture and lack of touch and lack of kind of loyalty when they don't get to know their teammates as well. I'm curious if you're seeing that trend and if that trend affects your business in any way.
Yeah, and this is actually one of the things, and we've done a couple like different pieces of content is in the hybrid world and in like a remote world, right? Where people are anywhere and everywhere. Mm-hmm. Like the biggest question to answer from the CEO down in terms of building culture is like, how do we build this distributed and asynchronously, right? Mm-hmm. Because we're all around the world. We can't just like hop on a Zoom, right? It's all in different pockets, right? And like we don't have those like kind of in real life relationships, right? And so like, I think this is something we've done really well, right? And I think reward systems in general, right, when designed well, are like huge levers of culture.
Yeah.
Because you're elevating and you're amplifying what you care about as an organization and then rewarding it, right?
Yeah.
And so like for us, it's like Blueboard is not only like a reward system, but it's a very social and a very like kind of top of mind system, right? That's very marketable. Mm-hmm. And so for us, like we've been really leaning into this idea of like, how do you build asynchronous culture? One of the key levers is an important and impactful rewards program and system.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's where I could see like a skydiving video being shared on the network while they're maybe wearing the t-shirt from the company, and just like this like association of something really cool and fun that is outside of work, but still reflects work, and that's part of an experience that you're helping to create for someone can help fill that void.
100%.
I actually think I saw on LinkedIn, like within the last few weeks, exactly that, where someone went skydiving. It may have been a Blueboard experience, but where they went on LinkedIn, they were essentially bragging about this experience that they had gotten through their company. So, I think that's probably us. That's awesome. We'll take credit for it either way.
Now you can ask the hiring question. I think that's where you were going.
Yeah, it sounds like a pretty incredible place to work. I hope you actually give some of your employees some of the experiences that you give to other companies. But
100, yeah, we definitely eat our own dog food.
There you go.
Not a surprise.
So for our audience, if anyone's interested, are there roles that you're trying to fill at this point, or anything that any place that they might want to check out?
Well, we are hiring a VP of marketing.
Okay.
And that's kind of, that's going to be our marketing leader kind of at this next stage of growth, kind of going to, 100 million ARR over the next couple of years.
Sounds like a fun VP marketing role.
Yeah. Yeah. And, we're really focused on that is like the kind of the brand kind of category and product
so much
marketing.
Great brand and content you can build around that brand that's the right person could just thrive in that role. So that's awesome. Hopefully they're listening today and reach out there. So if they were to reach out to you, what's the best way to do that?
You could email me, Kevin@blueboard.com. Awesome. Is probably the best way to get a hold of me.
Awesome.
Carrier pigeon.
Hopefully we'll flood your inbox with that. So one other question we like to end on is, what do you feel like you understand about growth now that you may not have understood a year or two ago?
So, I think early on, and maybe it'll go a few years ago, right? Is like as a founder, you're very much on the ground and you're really in tune kind of to the sales process and like objections and how to position and things like that. I think like what I've become as the company's grown, we're over 200 people now, is how to better model growth and how to know when to kind of lean into scale and to invest in certain areas. And so, we've built out like our, kind of our pipeline models and like, entering a quarter, how are we feeling about hitting our goal and like, where do we need to increase kind of pipeline generation? We lean heavily on this kind of this like sales pod model where like, we know to hire this next pod when we have both the dollars to generate kind of the demand, the sales development person to kind of qualify that demand, and then the AE to kind of close on that demand. And like we hire like a growth pod, and that's kind of how we think of like our like growth units to scale. So like there's cool. I think like being dialed into like the model and how that kind of coordinates to the ground level has like made my thinking on like scaling growth just like much more refined and precise.
Yeah. So Ethan and I actually interviewed my co-author on the book Hacking Growth, Morgan Brown, this a couple of days ago. And one of the big things he emphasized that he's kind of learned in his time at Facebook and now at Shopify is this much more systems thinking. And it sounds like that's where you're going with that. Like the more you understand the system, the more you can manage it and also improve it.
Definitely. And so, it's been so much more systems thinking, and I'm like back to more of the PwC days. Right?
Yeah.
But it's been fun, right? Because I feel like I'm not out of touch of like what's actually going down on the ground, but like, okay, like how do we think things from the system? Like, how do we increase these conversion rates and being like, so it's been tops down, bottoms up.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, congrats, Kevin. That's such a cool story to hear. The early just grind days and how you learn probably so much through that grinding, but it's put you in a position where you're really making a lot of impact and bringing meaning to the lives of employees beyond just simply dropping an Amex card on their desk. So I'm stoked for what you've done so far and excited to see what comes next.
Thank you. Well, appreciate you all having me. It's been a fun conversation.
For sure.